6th grade. Welcome to my very first video. Hopefully this video finds you cozy at home, working hard, remembering to stick to your schedule to get everything done by Friday at midnight, which is your deadline unless your teacher has stated otherwise. The first story that we're going to look at today is The Bracelet. I chose this story for your very first week because it's pretty easy. What it looks at here is all of the story elements that we've already talked about, like conflict and resolution. And it also asks you to look at the story from the first person narrative, so we see inside the main character's thoughts. Before you read, it's a good idea to look at your vocab, which is on page 149 in this book that you should have at home with you, because you want to know what those words mean before you move forward in the story. It is also a good idea to read about the author, and that is on page 155, and what you'll find out is the author, Uchida, was actually in an internment camp like the main character was. So she's writing from her own experience during World War II. She was a Japanese American that experienced exactly what the main character did. So we are going to begin on page 150 of the story, and as I read, obviously I'm not going to be looking at the camera, so this part will be visually very boring, but you should also be reading along with me, so that shouldn't be too awkward for you because you should be reading too. Let's begin on page 150. Mama, is it time to go? I hadn't planned to cry, but the tears came suddenly, and I wiped them away with the back of my hand. I didn't want my older sister to see me crying. It's almost time, Rory, my mother said gently. Her face was filled with the kind of sadness I had never seen before. I looked around my empty room, the clothes that Mama always told me to hang up in my closet, the junk piled on my dresser, and the old rag doll I could never bear to part with. They were all gone. There was nothing left in my room, and there was nothing left in the rest of the house. The rugs and furniture were gone. The pictures and drapes were down, and the closets and cupboards were empty. The house was like a gift box after the nice thing inside was gone. Just a lot of nothingness. It was almost time to leave our home, but we weren't moving to a nicer house or to a new town. It was April 21st, 1942. The United States and Japan were at war, and every Japanese person on the West Coast was being evacuated by the government to a concentration camp. Evacuated here means removed. Mama, my sister Kiko, and I were being sent from our home and out of Berkeley and eventually out of California. Page 151. The doorbell rang and I ran to answer it before my sister could. I thought maybe by some miracle a messenger from the government might be standing there, tall and proper and buttoned into uniform, come to tell us it was all a terrible mistake, that we wouldn't have to leave after all. Or maybe the messenger would have a telegram from Papa, who was interned. Interned here means imprisoned or confined, in a prisoner of war camp in Montana because he had worked for a Japanese business firm. The FBI had come to pick up Papa and hundreds of other Japanese community leaders on the very day that the Japanese planes had bombed Pearl Harbor. The government had thought they were dangerous enemy aliens. Aliens here means foreigners. If it weren't so sad, it would have been funny. Papa could no more be dangerous than the mayor of our city, and he was every bit as loyal to the United States. He had lived here since 1917. When I opened the door, it wasn't a messenger from anywhere. It was my best friend Lori Madison from next door. She's holding a package wrapped up like a birthday present, but she wasn't wearing her party dress, and her face drooped like a wilted tulip. Hi, she said. I came to say goodbye. She thrust the present at me and told me it was something to take to camp. It's a bracelet, she said before I could open the package. Put it on so you won't have to pack it. She knew I didn't have 1 inch of space left in my suitcase. We had been instructed to take only what we could carry into camp, and Mama had told us that we could each take only 2 suitcases. So here you want to really think about how you would feel if you were forced to leave and go to a camp just because of your race. And this is basically what's happening in America right now. Americans feared Japanese citizens because they were Japanese, thinking that they would side with Japan and somehow cause danger to its citizens, even though they were also citizens. So she is being forced to leave her house and only take 2 suitcases. So imagine putting everything that you had that was important to you into suitcases, and whatever you couldn't fit has to be left behind. We are on the right side of page 151. Then how are we ever going to pack the dishes and blankets and sheets they told us to bring with us? Kiko worried. I don't really know, Mama said, and she simply began packing those big, impossible things into an enormous duffel bag, along with umbrellas, boots, a kettle, a hot plate, and a flashlight. Who is going to carry that huge sack? I asked. But Mama didn't worry about things like that. Someone will help us, she said. Don't worry. So I didn't. Lori wanted me to open her package and put on the bracelet before she left. It was a thin gold chain with a heart dangling on it. She helped me put it on, and I told her I'd never take it off, ever. Well, goodbye then, Lori said awkwardly. Come home soon. I will, I said, although I didn't know if I would ever get back to Berkeley again. I watched Lori go down the block, her long blonde pigtails bouncing as she walked. I wondered who would be sitting in my desk at Lincoln Junior High now that I was gone. Lori kept turning and waving, even walking backward for a while until she got to the corner. I didn't want to watch anymore, and I slammed the door shut. The next time the doorbell rang, it was Mrs. Simpson, our other neighbor. She was going to drive us to the Congregational Church, which was the civil control station where all the Japanese of Berkeley were supposed to report. Now we're on the top of page 152. It was time to go. Come on, Rory, get your things, my sister called to me. It was a warm day, but I put on a sweater and my coat so I wouldn't have to carry them, and I picked up my 2 suitcases. Each one had a tag with my name and our family number on it. Every Japanese family had to register and get a name. We were family number 13453. The number in this story is also important because the numbers were to take away people's identity. You were no longer a person with a name, you were just a number. So that's a way to dehumanize people that they were treating like animals, essentially, and putting them in camps. Mama was taking one last look around our house. She was going from room to room as though she were trying to take a mental picture of the house she had lived in for 15 years so she would never forget it. I saw her take a long last look at the garden that Papa loved. The irises beside the fish pond were just beginning to bloom. If Papa had been home, he would have cut the first iris blossom and brought it inside to Mama. This one's for you, he would have said, and Papa would have smiled and said, Thank you, Papa-san, and put it in her favorite cut glass vase. But the garden looked shabby and forsaken. Forsaken here means abandoned or deserted. Now that Papa had gone and Mama was too busy to take care of it, it looked the way I felt, sort of empty and lonely and abandoned. When Mrs. Simpson took us to the civil control station, I felt even worse. I was scared, and for a minute I thought I was going to lose my breakfast right in front of everybody. There must have been over 1,000 Japanese people gathered at the church. Some were old, and some were young. Some were talking, laughing, and some were crying. I guess everybody else was scared too. No one knew exactly what was going to happen to us. We just knew we were being taken to the Tanforan racetracks, where the army had turned into a camp for the Japanese. There were 14 other camps like ours along the west coast. Now we are on page 153. What scared me the most were the soldiers standing at the doorway of the church hall. They were carrying guns with mounted bayonets. I wondered if they thought we would try to run and whether they'd shoot us or come after us with their long bayonets if we did. A long line of buses waited to take us to camp. There were trucks, too, for our baggage. And Mama was right. Some men were there to help us load our duffel bag. When it was time to board the buses, I sat with Kiko and Mama sat beside us. The bus went down the Grove Street and past the small Japanese food store where Mama used to order her bean curd cakes and pickled radish. The windows were all boarded up, but there was a sign still hanging on the door that read, We are loyal Americans. The crazy thing about the whole evacuation was that we were loyal Americans. Most of us were citizens because we had been born here, but our parents, who had come from Japan, couldn't become citizens because there was a law that prevented any Asian from becoming a citizen. Now everybody with a Japanese face was being shipped off to concentration camps. It's stupid, Kiko muttered, as we saw the racetrack looming up beside the highway. If there were any Japanese spies around, they'd have gone back to Japan long ago. I'll say, I agreed. My sister was in high school, and she ought to know, I thought. When the bus turned into Tanforan, there were some more armed guards at the gate, and I saw barbed wire strung around the entire grounds. I felt as though I were going into a prison, but I hadn't done anything wrong. We streamed off the buses and poured into a huge room where doctors looked down our throats and peeled back our eyelids to see if we had any diseases. Then we were given our housing assignment. The man in charge gave Mama a slip of paper. We were in Barrack 16, apartment 40. Mama, I said, we're going to live in an apartment. Now we're on the top of page 154. The only apartment I had ever seen was the one my piano teacher lived in. It was an enormous building in San Francisco with an elevator and thick carpeted hallways. I thought how wonderful it would be to have our own room, our own elevator. A house was all right, but an apartment seemed elegant and special. We walked down the racetrack looking for Barrack 16. Mr. Numa, a friend of Papa's, helped us carry our bags. I was so busy looking around, I slipped and almost fell in the muddy track. Army barracks had been built everywhere, all around the racetrack and even in the center oval. Mr. Noma pointed beyond the track toward the horse stable. I think your barracks is out there. He was right. We came to a long stable that had once housed the horses of Tanforan, and we climbed up the wide ramp. Each stall had a number painted on it, and when we got to number 40, Mr. Noma pushed open the door. Well, here it is, he said, apartment 40. The stall was narrow and empty and dark. There were 2 small windows on each side of the door. 3 folded army cots were on the dust-covered floor, and 1 light bulb dangled from the ceiling. That was all. This was our apartment, and it smelled of horses. Mama looked at my sister, and then at me. Won't be so bad when we fix it up, she began. I'll ask Mrs. Simpson to send me some material for curtains. I could make some cushions, too, and, well, she stopped. She couldn't think of anything more to say. Top of page 154 on the right-hand side. Mr. Noma said he'd get some mattresses for us. I better hurry before they're all gone. He rushed off. I think he wanted to leave so that he wouldn't have to see Mama cry. But he needn't have run off because Mama didn't cry. She just went out to borrow a broom and began sweeping out the dust and dirt. Will you girls set up those cots? She asked. It was only after we put up the last cot that I noticed my bracelet was gone. I've lost Lori's bracelet, I screamed. My bracelet's gone. We looked all over the stall and even down the ramp. I wanted to run back down the track and go over every inch of the ground we walked on, but it was getting dark and Mama wouldn't let me. I thought of what I'd promised Lori. I wasn't even going to take the bracelet off, not even when I went to take a shower, and now I had lost it on my very first day in camp. I wanted to cry. I kept looking for it all the time we were in Tanforan. I didn't stop looking until the day we were sent to another camp called Topaz in the middle of the desert in Utah, and then I gave up. But Mama told me never mind. She said I didn't need a bracelet to remember Lori, just as I didn't need anything to remember Papa, or our home in Berkeley, or all the people and things we loved and had left behind. Those things we carry in our hearts and take with us no matter where we are sent, she said. And I guess she was right. I've never forgotten Lori, even now. So, now you have response questions, which are on page 156. You have a writing assignment and a vocab assignment, all which will go into those Google Docs that are shared with me already, and I will check them on Saturday because everything's due Friday at midnight. So please stay on that schedule and reach out to me on email or find me on Google Hangouts, and please ask questions. That's what I'm here for. I'm working just when you are, and I'm available to help. I want to help, so please don't feel like you're bothering me. Please reach out, even if it's just to say hi. So stay safe and wash your hands.